So what's it really like teaching in international schools in Asia compared with teaching in Australian public schools where I came from? This video will compare the two and possibly will get you thinking about whether or not you might want to actually take that leap and head abroad and teach in international schools like I have. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the work environment and also the curriculum. This will give you a little bit of an insight into the differences and what an international school really is, I suppose. So in Australia, you generally follow a national or a state framework. When I went to school in Australia, when I taught in Australia the first time around, I taught the high school certificate. Obviously, it's different in Victoria, and it was different to what I taught when I was in Queensland. I taught in Queensland for 2 years when I sort of went back for a little while in 2015. In international schools, I have pretty much always taught the International Baccalaureate, the IB, but I've also occasionally taught the British curriculum, the IGCSE for middle years. Sometimes schools have the American curriculum, and there's a thing called the IPC, which is an international primary curriculum. The learning focus in international schools, probably it's more inquiry-based and more student-centered, certainly more than when I left Australia, although that probably has changed. So I need to really just clarify that it's been a long time since I've taught in Australian schools. I did go back, as I said, in 2015, but previously it was 2002 when I left to head overseas and start working in international schools in Asia. Teaching resources. So in public schools in Australia, the resource quality probably varies by region and by funding. It's obviously a state-based system. In international schools, my experience only, and remember I'm just talking about my experience is that the international schools are really well funded, modern resources, and lots of emphasis on technology. The other thing I've noticed is more support staff, so more teaching assistants. For example, I think nearly every primary school teacher has a teaching assistant. In secondary school, it's less likely you'll have it's less likely that you'll have a teaching assistant, but you often have learner support teachers that are in the room helping students that might have the requirement for special support. Now, facilities, of course, will vary greatly, and I know there are some great facilities in Australian schools as well. The examples that I can share, though, when I was in China, in Nanjing, we had some amazing facilities, not just the athletics track and the synthetic pitches, but also incredible theatre and music facilities, a huge complex that had the swim centre. So that was a big thing. My current school has a swimming pool, and swimming is a pretty big thing here. We've got a gym, we've got football pitches. We don't have large football facilities, and we don't have a running track. So my school at the moment sort of lacks some of those facilities that some international schools may have. But overall, facilities in international schools are pretty amazing. In fact, let's just have a little bit of a walk around my current school here in Bangkok and see some of the facilities that I get to work in and that students get to use. Professional development. So in public schools in Australia, it would vary again a little bit by region and would be based on some kind of government support to provide that professional development. In international schools, there's a real focus on international baccalaureate training or Cambridge training if you're doing the British curriculum. And so there's lots of opportunities for international conferences to attend. And if you need to update your understanding of a new curriculum change, you'll often be sent to do a workshop or to get the sort of update on the new curriculum. And I've been really lucky. I've been sent to several different countries for professional development opportunities. When I was in my first school in the Philippines, my first international school, I was sent to Hong Kong to do some training for the International Baccalaureate Business Management course that I had started teaching. I was sent to Melbourne for a course when I was living in Singapore. I've done workshops and courses and done some conferences in Kuala Lumpur, in Hanoi, and actually a couple in Hong Kong. And I was meant to go to India once, but that sort of fell through, and that was when they sent me to Melbourne instead. And another one in Bangkok when I was living in Singapore. So these opportunities are really great. A chance to travel, you get to see a little bit of the world while you're working as well. Salary and benefits. So this is kind of why we're all here, I suppose. We all want to see how much money you might get paid as an international teacher. I guess I'd have to say that Australian teachers are paid reasonably well, pretty competitive pay, strong unions as well, which sort of helps to kind of try to keep the salary up to date and tracking inflation. And also the other thing about Australian teachers is the superannuation benefits. So the fact that often teachers will retire with a pretty hefty superannuation package if they've been a long-term teacher. And of course, there's job security in Australian schools as well. In international schools, of course, it will depend upon the school. It will depend upon sort of whether you're in a top tier school where the packages are incredible, where you might be given some kind of gratuity as well after a certain amount of time, and where you get, in some cases, you've got a tax-free income. In China, I didn't have to pay tax at all, and in other places where the tax rate is just a little bit lower, a lot lower in fact. So that the tax rates, of course, is something that we'll talk about in a moment. The package for international teachers often includes health insurance. In fact, it always includes health insurance. Sometimes that's for your spouse and your children as well. It includes return flights every year, so I get to go back to Australia for free every year. There are often other benefits included as well. Sometimes there's like a holiday bonus pay for the holidays. When you go on field trips, you often get a stipend to use when you're on those trips. In some cases, you also do have some kind of contribution going into a retirement package as well. The big thing, though, I suppose, in international schools is the free tuition for your kids. So I had two daughters that went through the international school system, and the fees are pretty high, really, really high, in fact. So to get that free education for two children was pretty amazing. And overall, I would certainly say that I get paid more in international schools than I did, and more than I would if I was in Australia. But it kind of depends upon the cost of living. When I moved from China to Hong Kong, I was getting paid a lot more to move to Hong Kong, but I was saving a lot less because the cost of living was so much more. So I've got here sort of some data that I collected just to make sure that I was kind of up to date. So this is the average gross teacher salary as well as income tax. And this is broken down according to age brackets. So of course, it will vary if people have positions of responsibility. But if I just pick there the 31 to 35 age group and an average salary of around about 100,000 Australian dollars, and you can see the amount of tax would be around about 23%, the average tax rate. So that is a little bit higher than what I would have paid in any other places. So here's the comparison with two places that I lived: Hong Kong, where I lived for 8 years, Singapore, where I lived for 6 years. And rather than giving you the local amount, we'll look at the Australian calculation, the Australian conversion. Annual salary in Hong Kong sort of got there 145,000 up to 190,000, and that's probably at the top end, to be fair. And the Singapore one, 60 to 105, and again it varies greatly. In fact, I would say some schools in Singapore pay more than the schools that I worked at in Hong Kong. And if we want to have a look at the tax system, so you can see in Hong Kong, for example, the maximum marginal rate is 17%, and so the estimated amount of tax paid there was around about 15%. Yeah, so if you look at Hong Kong here, one of the places where I lived, it's a progressive tax system with a marginal rate of a maximum marginal rate of 17%. And so the effective tax rate for 100,000 Australian dollars is around about 15%. Okay. In Singapore, it's a little lower. Again, a progressive system, highest marginal rate is 24% for those that are earning more than 1 million Singapore dollars. So for an annual income equivalent to 100,000 Australian dollars, the effective tax rate in Singapore is around 7%. So you would have paid $7,000 on your $100,000 salary. Now I've picked these two places just because of the fact that the cost of living in these two places is quite high. So the salaries are pretty high, but the cost of living is higher in these two places than most places in Asia, of course. But then again, probably pretty comparable to Australia at the moment as well. So obviously you've got to take into account your salary, your tax rate, and the cost of living. So there's a lot to sort of consider when you are thinking about moving overseas. Now, the upside about international teaching is that you might be able to get paid around about the same amount as in these two places, but live in a place that's much, much cheaper. A place such as Thailand, where I am now, a place such as Vietnam, where lots of international schools also exist. And if the cost of living is much lower, then you get to save a lot of money. Teaching is all about the students. And when I left Australia, one of the biggest things that I had to do in my job in Australia was classroom management. And that has changed quite a lot in my experience in international schools. Class sizes is obviously a big thing. So a bit of research tells me that the average class size in Australia at the moment are between 20 and 25 per class. They can be larger in public schools. I recall teaching classes up to 30. In international schools, typically class sizes range between 15 and 20. Some cases they can be much lower. I've had smaller classes than that. At the moment, I do have a couple of large-ish classes up to 20, even with my grade 11 and 12. But there's more individual support provided. As I said before, sometimes there's teaching assistants. So generally, class sizes are considerably smaller, considerably lower in international schools. The other thing, of course, is the students that you're teaching in international schools come from great diversity of places, of nationalities. In some cases, they're predominantly expat kids. In other cases, they are local students, but they're pretty wealthy students, so they're coming from pretty good backgrounds. And they're very motivated. And because they're so motivated, there's a great work ethic. Classroom management isn't a problem at all. I often joke that I've hardly ever had to raise my voice in 20 years of teaching in international schools. Very rarely would I have to worry about getting the class under control and getting them to work. They're very, very motivated, and they're very nice students as well. What I've found is there's an incredible respect for teachers in Asia especially. So I think that's a big thing. Students respect you, but parents do as well. When you're having parent-teacher conferences, there's a huge amount of respect that the parents give to us teachers, and they realise the role that we're playing and how important our role is in getting their kids to where they want to be. So related to that is, I guess, the workload, but also the lifestyle and this great idea of work-life balance. So in public schools in Australia, there's planning time to manage the workload, but I think there's a fair bit of administrative load as well. I often hear my teacher friends complaining about that side of the job. And as I said before, a lot of the workload and planning probably relates to how your classroom management is operating as well. And so experienced teachers are obviously better at that, and there's less time that needs to go into it. In international schools, even though you don't have to worry as much about classroom management, the workload can be pretty intense as well. Lots of extracurricular requirements, and also lots of planning that's required to make sure that you're meeting the international expectations in terms of curriculum. But there is a lot of collaborative time that's provided as well, which is really, really great. So I'd say, again, it varies. And in some schools, you're getting paid a huge amount of money, but the workload is pretty intense. And in the sort of the second tier schools, I suppose, the salary is a little lower, expectations are a little less, and the workload and the stress is a little lower as well. The parental expectations are pretty high in international school settings. So in terms of the lifestyle and the work-life balance, obviously Australia is a stable country. If you've grown up in Australia, you're familiar with the culture and everything is just great. You've got a great lifestyle, obviously depending upon where you live and how expensive the place is where you're living. I loved living by the beach, for example, and so I found the lifestyle in Australia was great when I wasn't working, and obviously that's why I still go back there quite regularly. In Asia, it's more about the exciting travel opportunities as well as the culture and the diversity. So the chance to immerse yourself into a local culture, even if you're not traveling outside of that country, understanding, learning about the culture. There's incredible learning opportunities, I suppose, to learn about the world, to change your perspective. So that is amazing. It may very well be that you're working longer hours in an international school, but you've got better holidays. Definitely longer holidays. I'd say 12 to 14 weeks holiday per year is pretty standard. A very long summer holiday, and as I said, great travel opportunities. Here in Thailand, where I live at the moment, it would take me a long time to explore all the different places that I'd like to visit here in Thailand, including all the islands. all the cultural sites and the places I would love to visit. And I mostly give up some of that in order to travel more internationally. I recently got back from Vietnam, but that was for a school trip. So sometimes you have school trips internationally, which is amazing. I was coaching a football team, a soccer team, in a tournament in Hanoi. But it's very easy to travel down into Malaysia, to Singapore, to jump on a flight. Flights are really cheap in Asia as well. Flight to Hong Kong or the Philippines. I love traveling around places like Cambodia and Laos that are also very, very close. In fact, you can catch a train from Bangkok into Cambodia. And the trains these days are really becoming even more efficient, and you can catch trains all the way from here right through Laos and into China. So for me, it's all about the travel and the lifestyle and the culture, and obviously the holidays are pretty great as well. The only downside, I suppose, is that my long holiday doesn't align with Australian holidays. So when I go back at Christmas and my teacher friends are on their really long holiday, I'm probably only back there for a couple of weeks. But this lifestyle and work balance, obviously, again, would vary depending upon where you are. Now, getting a job, and this is a big part of the whole international scene, it's rather different in terms of how you get your jobs. In Australian public schools, obviously, it's state-centred, and so therefore you're likely to be applying to the state body, the education department in that particular state. You'll need your local teaching qualifications, of course, whether that's your Bachelor of Education or Diploma of Education. The same applies in international schools. You have to have your recognised credentials, BEd or Diploma of Education, or the PGCSE, the Postgraduate Certificate of Education, which a lot of international teachers have. And in applying for international jobs, it does help if you've got experience with the International Baccalaureate or the Cambridge curriculum, if that's the type of school that you're applying for. Of course, getting your first job is the challenge, and you probably don't have any of that experience when you're leaving Australia. So you just have to try to find a way to get your foot in the door to get that international experience. In terms of actually the process, as I said before, with Australia, you've got the procedure that where you're applying directly to the State Department. I know those things have changed. In international schools, it's direct hire by the individual schools. You get given a job on a contract. Sometimes the contract starts out at 2 years. Maybe that can be extended, and maybe the renewals are annual contract renewals, so less stability for sure. In terms of getting the job though, often recruitment agencies are the way that people do this, and attending job fairs, although the job fairs have started to become a little bit redundant in terms of a lot of people are doing online interviews. So they'll arrange interviews with international schools through recruitment agencies and then do the interview online rather than having to attend a fair. I've attended 2 job fairs, which was a great experience, but I've also got a fair few of my jobs through online interviews or just actually flying to the country, to the school and having an interview on site. So how do you decide whether international teaching is the right thing for you? So everyone has a different situation, of course. Everyone's family situation is different. What I will say though is that going international is not just about singles. It's not just young people who are adventurous and say, I want to travel the world and I'm going to teach overseas. A lot of people might do that. For example, people that teach English in English language centres and have that flexibility of just packing up and leaving. But what I would like to say is that it's not just for young people. I did it when I was, I think, 31, but I see a lot of teachers that arrive with families, couples, teaching couples with families, and they're bringing their kids for the experience as well. The kids get the cultural immersion, the kids get to learn a new language, the kids get to go to an international school and to do all the travel as well. So it certainly is for anyone that has that sort of that sense of adventure, I suppose, but also would love to live in another country rather than just travel through and be a tourist. It has its pros and it has its cons. You do have to put up with missing family events, missing your family. Some things are pretty difficult in terms of challenges when you're teaching overseas, just as if you were living overseas in any kind of job. In my first teaching job overseas, when I was overseas in the Philippines, my grandmother died, for example, and I wasn't able to get back to the funeral. So that's challenging. As your parents age, then you sort of worry that you need to get back and kind of check on them and look after them and not miss out on the time with them. You feel a little bit disconnected from your own country if you spend a lot of time overseas, as I have. So going back can be a challenge as well. But I think for me, at least, the pros far outweigh the cons. You learn a lot about the world. You learn a lot about yourself. You get to teach some amazing students. You get to work with amazing colleagues. and you develop this international community, and people will pack up and move, but you'll keep in touch, and you'll often find that wherever you travel, you'll know someone who's there and prepared to give you a bed for the night, and you'll catch up and you'll sort of reminisce about times when you worked together. So for me, it's been amazing, and I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope that I've kind of given you a little bit of food for thought if you are one of these people that are currently working in a public school system, whether it's in Australia or the UK or the US, and you're thinking about taking that leap and joining the world of international teaching. For me, it's been absolutely amazing. I highly recommend it. Thanks for listening, and I will see you around.